Hello Internet, and welcome to another episode of Experimental Cataclysm, the show where we talk about recent changes to the experimental version of Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead. I have recently returned from 2 weeks off from YouTube and people keep asking about it. Basically, the time off was fine, thank you for asking. I had some time to relax without the constraints of keeping to a schedule for YouTube, which is always kind of a background pressure in my life. I played a fair bit of Elden Ring, although I'm mostly over that now. I'm in a sort of tactical shooter mindset at the moment, and I did just discover a sniping game very recently, which I can't remember the name of right now, but that looks pretty fun, so there may be some videos on that as well. But anyway, that's not why most of you are here, so let's talk about Cataclysm. Because of the time off, we actually have 3 weeks worth of changes to talk about today. It is definitely going to be a longer show, 20 plus minutes would be my guess, and I gotta be honest, I'm feeling a little bit salty, although I will try to keep most of that out of the video. And real quick here, I just want to give a shout out to whoever does the changelogs. Sorry, I don't have the name in front of me right this second. Normally, I don't use the changelogs because they come out after I start researching and doing all that stuff on my own, but this time I use them extensively and they made this video a whole lot easier. So props to the community members who do this and the people who've historically done this. I know that they're a lot of work, but we do appreciate them. And then as my final note, you may have noticed that there was a major rework to the mutation system over the last couple of weeks. Now, I've still only barely looked at this. I don't have all the details yet. Because it was such a large overhaul of the system, I will make a standalone video explaining how it works now. That should come out next week. Worst case scenario, it'll be out next Friday, hopefully. I'm going to try to get it out sooner, but we'll see how it all shakes out. I really don't like falling behind when there's a big change like that. But okay, you want to start the video? Let's start the video. We'll see how hoarse I get by the end. So first up, let's talk about appliances. We've been keeping an eye on them as they develop, and there's been some additions over the last couple of weeks. So first of all, we've had the addition of reinforced/upgraded solar panels for use in the power grid system. Now, if you don't know, upgraded/reinforced solar panels are basically just better versions of the standard panels. Upgraded panels actually generate more power than standard panels, and then the reinforced ones are just more durable. Now, durability probably doesn't matter very much if you're using them for your static base. Most people don't play with wandering hordes on, for instance, so we tend to have a clear area around wherever we live. Also, good luck making these items. I saw that they need 10 electronic skill, which is I think is a little bit absurd. I would rather stuff like that be locked behind a lot of proficiencies rather than needing a crazy high skill level. Let's be honest, how often do you have a character in this game with a 10 in your electronic skill? I don't think I ever have in years and years of playing this game, although it might be easier now with practice recipes, I don't know. But anyway, that's not really relevant to this PR. So we've had the addition of those other solar panels. We also got an arcade machine, and I think this is pretty interesting. I know we have some game things that you can interact with for a morale boost. I really like the idea of an arcade cabinet in my base, although it's not really something that I would go out of my way to add into wherever I'm staying. We also had a pair of extension cords added to the game, and my first thought when I saw these, I only had one thought for what I would use this for. There will probably be situations where you can't pull your car directly up to the wall of your base, and since you probably want to plug your vehicle into your power grid, I thought that this would be what the cords were used for, to extend from your vehicle to your wall of your base. Now, unfortunately, no, this appears to be something that can only be used on appliances, and since your vehicle isn't a proper appliance, this will not work. Additionally, any carts that you make yourself to use as pseudo appliances, that will not work with these cords either. It has to be one of the preset appliances, and frankly, I think that is a massive limitation. Currently, we don't have that many appliances, and so using a lot of things with this system would involve you making your own carts/mini vehicles. I would like to see this change to include splicing into normal vehicles in addition to the regular appliances. Now, I don't know if that's actually possible or not, or how coding intensive that would be, but it seems sort of bothersome that it can only be used with the appliance vehicles. And I didn't actually test this, but I would guess that you can use jumper cables in these situations, but since these cords only work with appliances, I don't really see a huge reason for them to exist. Although I guess that's not fair, right? They exist in real life, so why wouldn't they exist in the game? It's totally fine. And then finally, very quick note here, you may remember that I commented on how revealing wall wirings required the pliers tool specifically. Well, now you can actually use a multi-tool for this purpose as well. I think this is great. Multi-tools are pretty common, and having the scope of possible tools expanded is usually a pretty good thing regardless of what, recipe or whatever. An additional fun fact, multi-tool lacks consistency in the game. For instance, the multi-tool is hyphenated, but the multi-tool CBM and other multi-tool items in the game have it as a single word. If someone wants an easy contribution, you could very easily and quickly tweak those to have a consistent naming convention. Anyway, our next change is tangentially related to appliances, and this comes from Frizz. Previously, in order to make the fridge appliance, you had to build a fridge from scratch. This is obviously obnoxious when there are fridges in literally every house in the game. Well, now instead you can actually just deconstruct existing fridges to get the intermediate item that you then use to craft the appliance. Now when you do this, however, make sure that you choose the option to deconstruct simple furniture. This will give you the fridge item. If you use the regular deconstruct option, it will actually give you the component parts like, most deconstructions in the game do. Anyway, this is a simple but pretty great change. I wanted to shout it out. It makes gathering a fridge for use in your base very much easier. Now next up from, I'm gonna say Aroka, we had a rebalance to the powered exoskeletons. Now we did talk about them recently-ish, but not really in a lot of detail, and they were added not that long ago. I haven't used them in the game yet, so forgive me, I don't have a lot of experience or understanding on how they work, but from what I gathered in the PR, basically using these exoskeletons were borderline impossible because of the weight restrictions that came with them. In the PR, it's referenced that if you had the bad back trait and tried to use the exoskeleton, you would be unable to move and in fact would repeatedly be falling to the ground. And this change sought to fix that, apparently by buffing the exoskeletons so that they can at minimum support their own weight plus the weight of their battery. And again, I'm not super familiar with these, so I don't really have opinions on this change, but if it fixes an otherwise broken thing, then that seems pretty good to me. Next up from Uzi Rag, we've got a simple expansion of the large building scenario. You can now choose hotel rooftops, office tower rooftops, and cathedral rooftops as starting locations. This is very straightforward. I just always like seeing additional starting locations added to the game, and this is especially true for the large building scenario. Some of us had talked about why there needed to be more locations for that scenario in particular, but anyway, I don't have much to say. Let's just move on. Alright, next up from Knight, we have some tweaks to the staff weapons in the game. Mostly this just nerfed their damage. The quarterstaff, for example, I believe went from 26 bash damage down to 18, which is a very significant reduction. And I believe the three staffs that were addressed were the quarterstaff, the staff sling staff, and the bow staff, I believe were the three. Now I have pretty mixed feelings on this. I expressed a lot of them on Discord. We had a pretty lengthy conversation about it. I think that ultimately, although people will be upset because these are very popular weapons, probably some of the most popular weapons in the game, even though people will be upset about it, I do ultimately think that, for instance, the quarterstaff dealt entirely too much damage. It is essentially just a stick, and it was outperforming the baseball bat, which is completely ridiculous. I think that out of all the wooden weapons in the game, I think the baseball bat should be the highest damage one out of all of them. And in my opinion, I think we should probably buff the damage values of the baseball bat. It should be the pinnacle of wooden weaponry in the game. I just think it should deal more damage. So in the end, I do think that nerfing the quarterstaff is acceptable. The main problems I have with this PR are, one, the individual who made this. I question their motives a lot of times when they make changes to the game. Historically, in my opinion, they have sought to make the game more punishing for really just no good reason, and then they try to rationalize it with excuses. For instance, this specific PR, the justification was that the staffs are made of sticks or planks, which is just not optimal for making a weapon deal a lot of damage. However, this is bad logic because literally every single wooden weapon in the game that we can make is made from sticks and planks. So I question your motivation. In my opinion, I think that you decided you wanted to nerf staffs because they're popular and their damage was too high, and then you tried to justify it after. And look, that's just my opinion, but it rubbed me the wrong way. I don't think that that's a great justification for making these changes. However, in the end, like I said, I think these staffs were outperforming other blunt weapons based on, some data that Kevin referenced and things like that. So I don't hate this change. I just sort of question the motivation behind it. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. This is the second time I'm recording this section because I got a little rambly in the last one. What this actually means is that quarterstaffs have had their damage nerfed in addition to a few other staff weapons. The quarterstaff is still, in my opinion, a good weapon. All the techniques that it offers makes it a good weapon, with the +2 to hit being a nice little bit of icing on the cake. So although they had their damages nerfed, they're still good weapons. So let's just move on. Next up from mail clips, we got the addition of some loose ammunition in looted gun store variants. Now, obviously, over the last year or so, we talked at length about these new looted variants. This was primarily grocery stores, liquor stores, military surplus, and gun shops. And I've always had some issues with these looted locations. I question why they were added to the game in the first place, and people convinced me that it fits with our lore, but I never really liked them. And one of the things that bothered me the most is that people would often say, oh, this was very hasty looting as the apocalypse was coming. But then when you actually went to that location, every single item of value had been stripped from that location. So it never really made sense to me that there were riots and people smashing and grabbing things, but there was nothing of value left behind. So now Mail Clips has made it so that the looted gun store variants will have some loose ammunition in them. In my testing, this seemed to be, it's not a lot of rounds. It seems like there's 3 or 4 bullets here and there. And if I'm being honest, maybe even a little too much for a looted variant. Maybe I just got lucky in my testing, but it did seem like I could still pick through and find, it was assorted rounds. They weren't all the same caliber, but I could still come away with 30 or 40 bullets. So I don't really have a take on that. I'm glad to see it because I think it makes sense from a realism perspective. In terms of balance and the actual numbers being right, I don't really know. In testing, you never know, right? I could have just got lucky and gotten some good rolls. But anyway, regardless, I'm pretty happy to see this. I think that this makes sense from a realism perspective. It's something I've complained about at length and am on record and very vocal about disliking disliking the emptiness. So yeah, I'm pretty on board for this change. I think the numbers might need a little tweaking, but overall I think this is a very good change. Next up, from another simulacrum, we've got the removal of body part chilling due to blood loss. So previously, if you lost a lot of blood, your temperature would drop on those specific body parts that you'd been bleeding from. Now this had been in the game for quite a while, and it's now been removed. In the PR, Sim references that we have a better blood loss system now, and that was the reason for removal. I'm not 100% what that means. I don't think we have a replacement temperature loss mechanic, but the removal itself I do think is good. It doesn't really make sense, right? Sure, if you lost a lot of blood, specifically from an arm, your arm might be numb due to blood loss or whatever, but coldness would most likely come in the form of like a full body chill and a lowering of your overall temperature, not a chill on that specific body part. Or maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. There was a reference in the PR that this may be connected to hypovolemic shock in the future. So instead of getting cold on specific body parts, you may get those full body chills when you go into shock. But other than that, I really don't have thoughts on this. Next up today, we've got some tweaks to cop zombies and military locations from Cursed Metal. So this PR mainly did 2 things. So firstly, it nerfed a lot of the military map extras in the game. If you don't know what that means, a map extra, it's like the body drops, or in this specific example, it's something like the helicopter crash. And what that ultimately means is that these military map extras are significantly less common than they used to be. So basic math tells me that they're about 1/5 as common as they used to be, and yeah, that's all I really have on that section of the PR. And then the other thing that this PR did was to tweak the number of handguns and rifles that are found on cop zombies in the game. Now I have a huge problem with this. So let's just talk about the PR. Based on what was said here, cops used to drop roughly 2 rifles and 2 handguns for every 10 of them that were killed. This has now been changed, so instead of 2 rifles per 10, they will now drop 1 rifle per 10, and instead of 2 handguns per 10, they will drop 4 handguns per 10. So it is ultimately a net boost to the number of firearms dropped by these enemies, and it leans heavily towards handguns. And I'm going to pop in here as the editor. Sorry if there's a weird cut, but I again rambled about this issue, so we're just going to keep things short and succinct here. So I've expressed that they've reduced the number of long arm spawns. None of that makes sense to me. I believe that police in this game should have a sidearm on them 100% of the time, and I believe many of them should have long arms on them as well. And the 2 main arguments that come up every time we discuss something like this is that people will say, oh well, they drop them when they die and reanimate. And then the other argument is that, oh well, they didn't have their assault rifle on their person, they left it in the trunk of their police car or in their base. And of course we've rebutted those arguments many times. Despite people saying they dropped them, we don't find random guns on the ground like we should if that's the situation. And then of course, if we look in a police car trunk, we are not going to find an assault rifle. We can't even find jacks and spare tires in most cars in this game, so of course they don't give us assault rifles. And the same is true of stockpiling in bases. Everyone wants to talk about gun stores being looted prior to the apocalypse, but guess what? Guns are not consumables, so if people are stealing them and squirreling them away, we should be finding them in their base. And that's all I have to say about this. We're not going to ramble about it. Again, this is like the 5th time I recorded this. It annoys me very much that there is a forced scarcity surrounding firearms. This PR was not backed up by real world data. It was just a gut feeling that this person had saying, oh, well, it should be 10% of them that have long guns. And I think that does not make sense. I think it's just yet another reduction of firearm spawns in this game, and I find it deeply annoying, and in fact, it's probably the biggest thing about the game at the moment that has been really irritating me. With all that out of the way though, we're just going to move on to the next PR. Next up, also from Bombastic Slacks, we've got the addition of a sweating mechanic to the game. Now, I'll link to some PRs in the description down below. They are quite large, and I would encourage you to read them if you want more information. I'm just going to be giving a real basic overview of this system. So anyone who's played this game knows that summer is terrible. Struggling with temperature is a time-honored tradition in Cataclysm, and every now and then you'll see someone post saying, you know, my character's naked, why am I so hot, and etc, etc. And there have been several ideas floated over the years on how to tackle this problem, and the sweating system that we're going to talk about is probably the first of several implementations that will make our temperature system a little bit more tolerable. Anyway, what this boils down to is that your character will now sweat, which will drain hydration and lower your temperature. This should, in theory, keep you from overheating in a lot of situations. Clothing will make you more or less sweaty depending on its material and thickness. In other words, thin cotton clothing is going to make you sweat less than like a thick pair of leather pants. And the idea here is essentially just, does this material allow for air to pass through it, or is it something that's very likely to trap your heat and sweat against your body? And that is the very basic, very simple explanation, at least in terms of how I understand it, which, let's be honest, I could be misunderstanding something because I'm stupid. So how do you know when you're getting sweaty? Currently, there's not a specific name for sweat itself. It's tied to the old wetness system we've had in the game. So if you find your character being damp or wet or soaked or etc., these are indicators that you're sweating. Now, in most circumstances, I think sweating would be a good thing. It helps you regulate your character's temperature at the cost of hydration. And since hydrating is a whole lot easier than lowering your core body temperature in this game, it seems like a pretty fair exchange to me. But yeah, there are no words attached to this that I found that were explicitly sweat related. They were all connected to the wet system. And also, before you ask, I couldn't really get a feel for how much hydration you actually lose through sweating. I assume it's very variable. The more you sweat, the more dehydrated you become, and it seems likely that in the early days of this implementation you may become dehydrated too fast or too slow. You know, it's something that'll probably be dialed in over time. But anyway, that's the basic rundown of the system. It's not overly complicated from the player side. As far as I can tell, it seems really straightforward. My thoughts in general are that this is a good change. I think temperature regulation has been out of control for a long time, and I'm hopeful that this will make the the summer period of the game a little bit more tolerable. My one note here is that I'd prefer we actually use the word sweat in these status effects at some point here in the future. My guess would be that a lot of players, and mostly new players, will be confused by why their character is suddenly wet. I don't think people will immediately connect it to sweating unless another player tells them that that's what it is. But that's really my only note here. It's a new system. It'll take me some time to decide whether I like it or not. And then I do want to touch on some of the complaining I've been seeing about this system. I have seen some people gripe about this. One of the noteworthy examples was someone basically saying like, I'm reading, I didn't realize that reading was such a sweaty thing to do. And I just want to say like, no, it's not the reading. Obviously, it's the fact that you're reading next to an open fire while you're wearing 40 pounds of leather and Kevlar gear. So please stop complaining. It seems really obvious why you're sweating, so just calm down a little bit. Anyway, that's all I've got to say about this at the moment. We'll see how it continues developing. Oh, and since we're talking about Bombastic Slacks, a good job, by the way. You've been contributing an awful lot lately. But anyway, they also had a rework on how damage for items gets factored. Now, I won't lie, it's a lot of charts, and I've got a big smooth brain. I'll link to the PRs in the description if you want to check it out. But as far as I can tell, it looks to me like basically when you are attacked and an attack would normally damage your armor, it looks like it's a little less common now. And again, there's a lot more detail in the PR. I just don't really know what most of it means. Ultimately, though, this should benefit you as the player, and you'll end up with a more durable armor in the end. And I'll just leave it at that. that instead of talking about something that I don't understand. And I think that's a wrap for the episode. As I said up front, I plan to make a standalone video for the mutation changes. That should be coming next week, provided it's not more complicated than I think it is. And it's good to be back from my time off, I guess. Sorry if I was salty in the episode. I tried to keep it reined in, but I definitely was a little irritated. Anyway, thank you for watching. I'll be back with more content in the near future, and I'll see you next time.